big and powerful.
Yeah. In 1944, the New York Times asked Vice President Henry Wallace if there were American fascists and if we needed to worry about them. And his response was not what I'm assuming the Times was expecting. He basically called out cartelists or cartelists, or however that word is pronounced. And he said that their goal, he identified these as the American fascists, that their goal was to combine their economic power in a way that could seize political power and then use the combination of those two to keep the working man in eternal subjection. I think was the last sentence of the article that he wrote for the New York Times. Is this, I've been referring to this for years as the cancer stage of capitalism, or unregulated capitalism. Are we there? Is that what's going on?
Well, in many respects, we certainly are. And what we have to revive antitrust law. You say people's eyes glaze over. Basically, this is government already has the tools to break up monopolies.
Right.
Government used to do this. I mean, this is not we broke up Ma Bell, the big telephone monopoly. And then Teddy Roosevelt, at the turn of the last century, broke up the Northern Securities Railroad monopoly, and we broke up the Standard Oil monopoly. And these gigantic monopolies dominated the American economy. They dominated American politics, and we can do it again. I mean, in fact, we have to do it again.
Now, the breakup of those monopolies back in the late 19th, early 20th century were there was enormous popular support for that, in large part because these giant industries were engaging in union busting. I mean, you had open warfare between workers and management. There's not. I don't perceive that level of antagonism toward big business in the United States right now, or is it there and it's just not as visible? It's not spilling out into the streets.
Well, that's not very visible. We don't have, unfortunately, much of a labor union movement left. I mean, in the private sector, fewer than 7% of the workers in the private sector are unionized. In the 1950s and 60s, it was over a third. And when you have so few people who are unionized, they don't have much of a voice. And we know American workers don't have much of a voice because essentially wages for hourly workers, 85% of the economy, 85% of the workforce, those wages have gone nowhere. Adjusted for inflation, they are exactly where they were about 30 years ago. And so these big monopolies are exerting huge power. Not only are they keeping prices higher than they should be, and they're also stifling innovation, making it difficult for small businesses to get in, but they are keeping wages down because they have so much power politically and economically over the economy.
It seems that there are a couple of ways that monopolies could be regulated or broken up or altered. Having to do with either vertical or horizontal integration. I mean, for example, if you were to say to Facebook, you have to divest yourself of all these companies that you've acquired, right? Instagram and all these other things, and just be Facebook. Would that be a start? But then you still have Facebook having essentially a national monopoly in whatever Facebook is, whatever you call that. Or if you were to say to Amazon, you can sell books and you can sell garden tools, but you can't sell everything else. Or, I mean, functionally, how do you do this?
Well, you put your finger on a couple of things that could be done. You could say that these big and Facebook and Amazon and Apple and these are the companies that are in many ways the largest, most powerful in the country right now, and Google.
Right.
You could say to them, you cannot acquire any more companies. You cannot basically act as a monopolist using your huge profits to gobble up other companies and make and make it so that those companies can't function as competitors. You could also tell them that they have to license some of their proprietary, some of their software to other companies, because much of their monopoly power comes in their networks, and that network effect becomes hugely important only because they have software that nobody else can get. You could say, for example, to Google, your search engine is so dominant, nobody else can get in. You are abusing your power with the search engine. You're putting on the first 10 searches the various companies that you own, well, you can't do that anymore. You've got to license your search engine on the same terms to anybody else that wants to provide searches.
Right.
There are many things that antitrust could do. The final, nuclear option is basically to say to these companies, you're being broken up. You're going to be busted up into 12 or 15 or 20 pieces. But that's not necessary. Antitrust law is much more subtle than that. But it's got to happen, Tom. Otherwise, these big companies. I mean, look what happened recently. The United States, the New York Times revealed just recently that Facebook executives, they withheld evidence of Russian activity on the platform
right.
Far longer than previously disclosed, and they also employed a political opposition research firm to discredit critics. Now, how long is it before Facebook actually threatens critics, threatens to use the huge amount of data it has, the huge information bank that it has, to unload on critics and silence critics, essentially? I mean, this is the danger politically of monopolization.
Professor Reich, we have just about a minute till we hit a hard break. Thomas Jefferson famously begged James Madison not to allow monopolies, or he called them monopolies in commerce, and what he was talking about was patents and trademarks. Then later he wrote 3 years. That should be the maximum. Wouldn't another way to do this be to change the copyright and patent laws and shorten the time that a company can hold essentially that kind of a monopoly?
Yes, we certainly could do that. And many of the big Google and Facebook and the others, they do depend on intellectual property, and that is their monopolies, and we could shorten the time that they could have patents and copyrights. But to the extent that they are based on network effects, and by network effect, I simply mean that the more people who use it, the more other people have to use it because everybody else is using it. That's not a patent problem. You really do have to force the companies to license their proprietary technology and allow others to get involved.
Right. That's a critical mass problem, essentially.
Yeah.
Professor Robert Reich, his latest book, The Common Good, the website inequalitymedia.org. RB Reich is the Twitter handle. Professor Reich, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Tom. Bye-bye.
It's always great talking with you. I always learn something. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and my thoughts on it and your thoughts on it as we continue the program. And welcome back. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Oh, yeah. That guy, Mr. Rice, he's one of my heroes.
He's a good guy. He is one of the smartest people around. He really understands his stuff.
And the other one that I recommend all your listeners read is Noam Chomsky.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2 books I read. Well, I read most all of them. I could. But Deterring Democracy and Keeping the Rabble in Order.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know how Noam Chomsky, he's a linguistics professor, come to be a prolific political writer?
I don't know how that happened.
Well, I kept reading his books till I found out because I wanted to know.
Mm-hmm.
But when he was a youth, he watched a friend of his get beat up by some bullies, and they really put a hurt on the kid.
Right.
And he went home and he remorsed for months because he didn't step in and stop it. And he couldn't forgive himself. So he started writing politically for the little people who didn't have voice.
That's remarkable.
That's why
I said that's remarkable.
Yeah, and he wasn't afraid anymore of being beat up by bullies or by anything.
Right.
But he was going to stand for the common man.
Yeah, I know.
And
I know back in the 80s or early 90s, somewhere along there, Noam Chomsky was pretty much only known by academics. He was known, he was quite famous for his linguistic work, but politically and his writings on economy and economics and politics and things like that were largely unknown because he was writing these 500- and 600-page books that were just incredibly dense. And the small publishing company, I think they were out of San Francisco, got permission from him, and they went through his giant books and pulled out little tiny pieces and published a whole series of small books that were, 60 to 120 pages each. Noam Chomsky in digestible form on individual topics. Noam Chomsky on, antitrust law or whatever it was. I don't remember the details. And that made him accessible, the average American. And that was when Chomsky became, made this giant leap from being this kind of well-known in academia, but not known nationally figure to somebody who everybody in the United States pretty much recognized his name. And, that was kind of cool. But anyway, you wanted to talk about the economy, Corky. We're running out of time here. What was your point you wanted to make about the economy?
Yeah, well, unions, that's what my point was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how can you fight? If you sit down at a poker table with $100 and you're playing against a guy that's got $1 billion, how long do you think you're going to be in the game?
Right.
You see, by unionizing, you have 1 million people with $100. They give it to you because you're the union leader. Now you can sit down at the table and have a fair game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's my point.
Okay.
Stand alone, and you're going to hang on.
Yeah. I'm with you. Corky, thank you very much for the call. And this is why, this is why we need to bring unions back. And it's why the countries that are successful, the small d democratic countries like in Northern Europe that are successful functioning social democracies, are typically between 70 and 90% unionized. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes and change past the hour. So interesting news coming out of Trump world. This is, some fascinating stuff. The special prosecutor, Robert Mueller, has come out and said he's pulling Manafort's plea deal. And everybody's speculating about what this means, but one of the things, and The Guardian came out this morning with an article suggesting that in March of 2016, Paul Manafort, I believe it was March of 2016, that Paul Manafort actually met with Julian Assange. And the WikiLeaks Twitter account this morning said, we'll bet $1 million that never happened. Well, they might not have met in person. I mean, maybe they talked over the phone, maybe they talked through an intermediary, or maybe they didn't have any communication at all. But the very specific kind of timeline that seems to be erupting is showing, okay, on February 29th, this is back in 2016. Okay, Donald Trump looks like he's moving forward. And Paul Manafort sends Trump a written pitch to make me your campaign manager. I will not even take a salary. And of course, free is Donald Trump's favorite word. And so, he hired them. And there was a recommendation from Roger Stone. The week later, a week after that, this is, I'm getting this off Daily Coast from a piece Mark Sumner wrote. A week after that, Sam Clovis, who seems to have some associations with some Russians, told the Trump team that good U.S.-Russian relations were the goal of the campaign. A week after that, Papadopoulos, who had been in that meeting and heard that speech, met with this professor in London who claimed to have Russian connections. That was all just in March of 2016. But then later on that month, it appears that, well, this is what Mark Sumner is writing. Russians began a dedicated attempt to hack the emails of more than 300 employees of the DNC, DCCC, and Clinton campaigns using two large teams of specialists. At the end of the month, two things happened. Trump met with his campaign team where Papadopoulos discussed Russian help, and Paul Manafort was hired by the Trump campaign. And so then he notes, if Paul Manafort was meeting with Assange in March of 2016, it shows that every part of the Russia plan, from stealing the Democratic emails to distributing them through WikiLeaks, was actually planned in advance, and that the campaign chair, Paul Manafort, was at the center of that. Now, if Manafort has been lying to Mueller all this time and thinking that he's getting away with it, this brings up the possibility of a whole new fascinating feedback loop. And that is that Manafort might have been Trump's eyes and ears inside the Mueller investigation. He was the guy who could spy on the investigation on behalf of Donald Trump. And so Mueller knew this. I mean, this is just speculative, but if this scenario is true, Mueller knew this and was feeding misinformation to Manafort about what he knew and what he was doing. Manafort then feeds that misinformation through his lawyers to Donald Trump. And maybe we've got, Hitchcock involved in this now, too, or whatever his name is, the new Attorney General. Whitaker, that's right. Involved in all this. And so then Trump fills out the written answers to Mueller's questions, and he fills them out with the lies that he thinks back up Manafort's lies. And now Mueller is coming out after he's gotten this written stuff from Trump and says, Manafort's lying. If Trump is too, whoa.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I mean, this is going to start getting really, really interesting. I got to tell you about Mia Love, and there's just a bunch of stuff going on. Stick around, and we'll pick up your phone calls also after the break. Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So there's a bunch of theories floating around out there, and if you have one, I'd love to hear it, or if you have thoughts on knocking down these theories. Apparently, Trump this morning is tweeting about, now, both sides do it, which is like, oh, really? That's interesting. Because it looks like, I mean, if this Guardian story holds up, that Manafort met with Assange in March of 2016, the same month that, Sam Clovis was in there in the Trump campaign, Papadopoulos was in the Trump campaign. Both of them were talking with people in Russia. The following month, Russian teams began hacking the DNC, according to the intelligence agencies. And then, later on that year, in October of 2016, I believe it was, WikiLeaks starts dumping these files that have been hacked back in May or April, May, June, whenever it was. If that indicates that this was all set up right from the get-go, right from the very beginning, that this was the plan, basically, then that would apparently be collusion, at least between WikiLeaks, somebody in Russia, whether it's a private entity or whether it's the government itself, and and the Trump campaign. And where is that going to go, and how does that work out? And at what point can Donald Trump, run away from that? I don't see it happening. So it's getting, this is one of those very, very interesting moments in time. And I'll pick up your calls here in just a second. A couple of other things I just wanted to mention in particular. I mentioned Mia Love. And she is, of course, the African-American, the only black woman in Congress who was a Republican, I believe. I'm pretty sure that's right. And she was beating Ben McAdams, the Democrat, and she's a Utah Congresswoman. She was beating Ben McAdams, then she was not beating him, and then at the final count just came out recently, a couple days ago, and said that, no, McAdams actually won. But back when it looked like McAdams was going to win, Trump tweeted, Mia Love gave me no love, and she lost. Too bad. Sorry about that, Mia. And so she's now coming out and talking about Trump. She says, the president's behavior toward me made me wonder, what did he have to gain by saying such a thing about a fellow Republican? See, she's right on the edge here of saying, it's all about my being black. She goes on to say, it was not really about asking him to do more, was it? Or was it something else? Well, Mr. President, we'll have to chat about that sometime. However, this gave me a clear vision, Mia Love says, of his world as it is. No real relationships, just convenient transactions. That is an insufficient way to implement sincere service and policy. So here you have a Republican congresswoman saying, wait a minute, this guy is entirely transactional. You can't have a relationship with him. You can't trust him, basically. She added, you see, we feel like politicians claim they know what's best for us. And by we, I believe she's speaking of black people in general. She says, you see, we feel like politicians claim they know what's best for us from a safe distance. Yet Washington, because they do, I'm missing a line here. They got cut off when this printed it. But basically what she had said was that in the Democrats, they at least make you feel like you have a home. And so, interesting. Keep an eye on this space. And then now it's coming out, by the way, Hunter writing over at Daily Kos, that this idea of the Saudis are buying hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons from us. The actual deal was for $15 billion, and it wasn't even a deal. It was a memorandum of intent, $15 billion. So Jared Kushner, about 3 weeks before Trump made his first overseas visit to Saudi Arabia, Jared Kushner wrote a memo in which he said, we need to do something to, quote, symbolically solidify, end quote, this relationship between Trump and Saudi Arabia. So we've got this $15 billion worth of stuff that the Saudis would like to buy from us, and over the course of the next few years, maybe they will. So let's just say it's $100 billion. Let's just make it up. And it will symbolically solidify our relationship. And Trump is continuing to lie using this stuff. And then finally, the last thing I want to share with you before I pick up your phone calls. Yesterday, sometimes, the Financial Times is just shocking in how blunt they can be. This is about the GM plant that is shutting down. They're shutting down 7 plants. The headline, General Motors shuts down 7 plants, drawing a rebuke from Trump. The second paragraph, it's also the second sentence of the article, says, shares in the largest U.S. car maker closed nearly 5% higher after it announced the moves. I'll let that sink in for a minute. A company announces that they have just laid off 18,000 people by buying them out, essentially, and they're going to lay off another 14,000, and they're going to close 7 plants. And their share price goes up 5%. Wall Street, the Dow, the market doesn't give a rat's ass about employment. Right? But then it continues. Share makers of the largest U.S. car maker closed nearly 5% higher after it announced the moves, which were intended to cut $6 billion in costs as GM braces for a downturn in its home market and the impact of the global trade war. In other words, the reason why General Motors is doing this, according to the Financial Times, is they're expecting a recession, maybe a depression. They're shutting down 7 whole factories. Ford, a month ago, announced that by 2020, they're no longer going to make cars in the United States. And GM is pretty much heading in that direction. I mean, this is not what Trump said he wanted. And, why is this of consequence? Well, because, see, if part of the problem, they identify it in this article, is that GM's costs in the last year, their steel costs and aluminum costs went up $1 billion because of Trump's tariffs. Now, if that manufacturing had come back to the United States, if the tariffs had been passed by Congress and they were going to be in place for the next 20 years, then you would have companies in the United States saying, let's get into the steelmaking business. And they would be building factories and, the price would be going down. But because Trump is doing it by executive order, claiming national security, companies have no guarantee that after the Trump leaves with the White House in 2 years, that there's going to be tariffs. So why build a factory based on tariffs that may go away? And so basically Trump's trade war is this toothless tiger making all kinds of noises and killing GM. It's amazing. Sue in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Sue, what's on your mind today?
Tom, it's great to talk to you. And I got to meet Robert Reich and his wife years ago, and that was fantastic.
That must have been.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where, but great to meet him. And anyway, I was just in Delray Beach, Florida. I live in New Mexico, but I was visiting a family member, and we noticed that the construction workers across the street and the roofers were all speaking Spanish. And we thought, well, why aren't there any white people or black people? I mean, just down the street, there's a black slum with lots of soup kitchens. And it just, it causes resentment in me. And I'm a very liberal, I love the Spanish culture, all this, but I bet you they're making $8 an hour.
Yeah.
And it causes resentment in me, and it causes resentment in my daughter. She's younger, and she actually voted for Trump because of immigration.
Yeah.
And, how do you feel about that?
I absolutely understand that. And this is, and this is the genius of Ronald Reagan saying we're no longer going to enforce the laws against hiring people who are not in this country legally. Right. And I mean, he did that with the clear and explicit intention of destroying the union movement. That was, that was what it was all about. And it worked. And now you've got, industries. I talked about this yesterday, meatpacking and construction. You've got industries that used to be entirely unionized and were really, really good high-paid jobs that are now low-paid jobs that are filled with labor that is not American. And,
right.
And Sue, thank you for the call. We just need to go back to enforcing the laws. We need to start putting employers in jail. Somebody tweeted to me yesterday a piece about how Trump is going to put employers in jail and how they had busted some 7-Eleven guy. It wasn't the actual, like the corporate, there was no executives involved. It was some franchisor or franchisee rather, who himself was an immigrant. I mean, it's like, come on. Jesse in Miami. Hey, Jesse, you wanted to ask about patent law?
Yeah. It's kind of connected to everything you're talking about. But, I know it didn't start, it had to start here. When people used to build a community church and school, you had that common spirit. Then somehow that got, navigated to selfishness. And I guess, the big people back in England push the people here in America, don't get away from that common spirit. But what do you think is the biggest reason? I got an idea, but I want to hear you say it. What's the biggest reason they started the patent laws? Thank you, Tom.
In the Constitution, it says to promote the useful arts and sciences, that Congress shall have the authority to create laws for copyright and trademark and patent, not specifically in those words, but effectively that. And the whole point of it was that the theory that somebody would be more likely to invent something if they knew that they would directly benefit from the invention, even if they couldn't do it. If somebody, if Thomas Edison had invented the light bulb but didn't have the means to create a factory to make them, he would still benefit from his invention, even though somebody else was building the factory. And that's a reasonable thing, and you can understand that. The problem is that particularly with copyright laws and trademark laws, Disney was at the forefront of this. As the mouse was expiring, It used to be the life of the author or the life of the creator. Then it was the life of the creator plus 10 years. Then it was the life of the creator plus 20 years. I think now it's the life of the creator plus 70 years.
Tom, let me get you a bright man. If you was got in a time machine and went back then there, what kind of argument you would have made against keeping it to, where it was privatized to one person? What kind of argument you would have made for the common people to do better than the individual?
Jefferson's argument was that copyright laws, trademark laws, and patents are all forms of monopoly, and monopoly is always anti-competitive, and it slows down the speed with which a society can transform itself technologically. And I think you could build a strong case that he was right. On the other hand, where he ended up after the Constitution was ratified and it contained patent law and trademark and copyright law, where he ended up was saying that they should not exceed 3 years. He had over 200 major inventions, and he never patented any of them. Yes, Jesse.
Play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
I know you enjoy it. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah, and absolute patents corrupt absolutely too. And I think that's what we're talking about, Jesse. I think you nailed it. Jesse, thanks a lot for the call. I mean, this is the big. Well, this is one of the things that Robert Reich is talking about, is if we're going to reconceive our economy, if we're going to re-understand our economy, learning from the lessons of the past as a result of the way that our monopoly laws or anti-monopoly laws have been trashed, we've got to have a conversation about this and share some common language.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week: 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
The Manafort deal and the GM deal. I guess I'll start with Manafort. I really think that Mueller already knew about all this. This is nothing new. This is just new pressure he's trying to put on Manafort to say the things he wants him to say. And now that Mueller has a Democratic Congress behind him, they got subpoena power, and this is all political. This is all made up political
Louis,
stuff.
it's not. Hang on just a second. You said that Manafort pulling the plea agreement is an effort to put more pressure on. Excuse me, Mueller pulling the plea deal because Manafort's lying to him is an attempt to put more pressure on him to, quote, say what Mueller wants. That can't be, because by pulling the plea deal, he has taken everything off the table. There's no possibility for Manafort to get this back. The only way he can avoid spending the rest of his life in jail is to be pardoned by Donald Trump. And I'm guessing that that'll happen right after Trump loses the election in November of 2020 and before he leaves office in January 2020. Or at least I'm guessing that's the deal he's cut with Manafort.
That's a possibility. But this makes it, if Trump does win, it makes it harder for Trump to give Manafort a plea deal because, Manafort, because Mueller is putting political pressure by going after, again, another canard.
I don't understand what that means.
I'm sorry.
You said Mueller is putting political pressure. Mueller's not a politician. He's a prosecutor.
He's a politician.
He's never been a politician. He's never been elected to anything. He's been a prosecutor his whole life, and he ran the FBI.
Okay, well, he's political. You and I will disagree on that. But
right.
Again, I see this as a completely political move. But as far as GM, I think both you and President Obama should be chastising GM. Bush gave GM some breaks, and of course Obama bailed out GM. I don't blame him for it. I disagree with some of the things he did in the bailout, but nonetheless, GM was bailed out by the U.S.
Yeah.
And now they reward us by taking away 15,000 jobs.
Well, here's what's happening right now, Louis, that maybe you're missing. Hang on just a second. Here's the big picture thing that I think you're missing. There are 7 major car lines that are sold in the United States. The top 5, the first 5, are all cars that are manufactured in Japan or are Japanese companies that are manufacturing in the United States with low-wage labor. They're not General Motors or Ford. And that's the problem that GM and Ford have. And Donald Trump said he was going to solve that problem by putting tariffs on Japanese cars. I haven't seen that happen. Have you?
No, I haven't, but I'm hopeful that it's going to work. But
he's not even talking about it.
What's that? He's
not even talking about it. If he wanted to save GM tomorrow, all he'd have to do is slap a 25% tariff on Japanese-made cars. He himself will tell you that. He said that during the campaign.
Well, I still disagree with GM running.
GM is just trying to survive. I mean, this is a company that...
GM is profitable right now. They're not trying to survive. They are making a profit.
They are anticipating... For our book today, we're reading from Elon Papp's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. This is from the preface. It's titled The Red House. The Red House was a typical early Tel Avivian building, the pride of the Jewish builders and craftsmen who toiled over it in the 1920s. It had been designed to house the head office of the local Workers' Council. It remained such until toward the end of 1947 it became the headquarters of the Haganah, the main Zionist underground militia in Palestine. Located near the sea on Yarkon Street in the northern part of Tel Aviv, the building formed another fine addition to the first Hebrew city on the Mediterranean, the White City as its literati and pundits affectionately called it. For in those days, unlike today, the immaculate whiteness of his houses still bathed the town as a whole in the opulent brightness so typical of Mediterranean port cities of that era and that region. It was a sight for sore eyes, elegantly fusing Bauhaus motifs with native Palestinian architecture in an admixture that was called Levantine in the least derogatory sense of the term. Such too was the Red House, its simple rectangular features graced with frontal arches that framed the entrance and supported the balconies of its 2 upper stories. It was either its association with the workers' movement that had inspired the adjective red, or its pinkish tinge that it acquired during sunset that had given the house its name. The former was more fitting as the building continued to be associated with the Zionist version of socialism when, in the 1970s, it became the main office for Israel's kibbutzim movement. Houses like this, important historical remnants of the mandatory period, prompted UNESCO in 2003 to designate Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site. Today, the house is no longer there, a victim of development, which has razed this architectural relic to the ground to make room for a car park next to the new Sheraton Hotel. Thus, in this street, too, no traces left of the White City, which it has slowly transmogrified into the sprawling, polluted, extravagant metropolis that is the modern Tel Aviv. In this building on a cold Wednesday afternoon, 10 March 1948, a group of 11 men, veteran Zionist leaders, together with young military Jewish officers, put the final touches on a plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That same evening, military orders were dispatched to the units on the ground to prepare for the systematic expulsion of Palestinians from vast areas of the country. The orders came from a detailed description of the methods to be employed to forcibly evict the people: large-scale intimidation, laying siege to and bombarding villages and population centers, setting fire to homes, properties, goods, expulsion, demolition, and finally planting mines among the rubble to prevent any of the expelled inhabitants from returning. Each unit was issued with its own list of villages and neighborhoods as the targets of the master plan. Codenamed Plan D, Dalet in Hebrew, this was the fourth and final version of less substantial plans that outlined the fate the Zionists had in store for Palestine and consequently for its native population. The previous three schemes had articulated only obscurely how the Zionist leadership contemplated dealing with the presence of so many Palestinians living in the land that the Jewish national movement coveted as its own. This fourth and last blueprint spelled it out clearly and unambiguously. Quote, "The Palestinians have to go," end quote. In the words of one of the first historians to note the significance of that plan, Simcha Flapan, the military campaign against the Arabs, including the conquest and destruction of the rural areas, was set forth in the Haganah's Plan Dalet. The aim for the plan was in fact the destruction of both the rural and urban areas of Palestine. As the first chapters of this book will attempt to show, this plan was both the inevitable product of the Zionist ideological impulse to have an exclusively Jewish presence in Palestine, and a response to developments on the ground once the British cabinet had decided to end the mandate. Clashes with local Palestinian militias provided the perfect context and pretext for implementing the ideological vision of an ethnically cleansed Palestine. The Zionist policy was first based on retaliation against Palestinian attacks in February of 1947, and it transformed into an initiative to ethnically cleanse the country as a whole in March of 1948.
This is
Once the decision
Thom
was taken,
Hartmann
it took 6
Program.
months to complete the mission.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Apologies for the first hour of our program. We had a complete crash of our automation system, but we are back. We are live. And there is so much to talk about today, the Monday after the Super Bowl. But let's start with, some serious, sober, thoughtful, the world could end because of nuclear war. What are we going to do about this kind of stuff? On the line with us is Derek Johnson. He's the executive director at Global Zero. GlobalZero.org is the website. You can tweet him at DerekJGZ or at Global Zero. Derek, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Tell me first of all, what was the INF Treaty? Where did this come from? Why should we be concerned about this? And why is Donald Trump getting us out of this treaty?
Oh, goodness. That's a great place to start. So the INF Treaty has been around for about 30 years. This was a Reagan-Gorbachev agreement. It was the first of its kind. Eliminated an entire category of nuclear weapons. These were short-range and medium-range nuclear missiles that had basically, terrorized Europe for most of the Cold War. Reagan and Gorbachev sat down, agreed to get rid of these things, sent thousands of nuclear missiles to the scrap heap, and helped bring about the end of the Cold War, this treaty. Mm-hmm. As for why the Trump administration is shredding it, your guess is as good as mine.
Well, hang on just a second. The excuse that they gave was that Russia is not in compliance. And my understanding is that the non-compliance that Russia had been involved with didn't have to do with building nuclear weapon, battlefield nukes and smaller intermediate range nukes, which is what this treaty bans, but instead had to do with, I believe, a radar system that was too closely positioned to one of the NATO countries, Poland or something. What was the breach? And apparently, they're claiming that we're also in breach. Was the breach so severe as to justify doing away with the treaty? Because now my understanding is that the Putin is saying
Cool. You know, without this treaty, we've got this hypersonic, travels 5 times faster than sound missile that we can launch from a plane that's going to come out. It's a kind of a glider that's undetectable by radar, and we're also building smaller weapons that we're going to use in a European theater possibly. You know, correct me. What do I have wrong about that? First of all.
Yeah. So there's been a dispute around this treaty for a number of years. So we've got mutual allegations of cheating on both sides. You have the Americans are saying that Russia has developed a missile that flies within that prohibited range, and that that the Russians have deployed this in violation of the treaty. On the flip side, you have the Russians, of course, who deny that. And say, well, you know, the Americans have deployed missile defense systems that can very easily and quickly be sort of retooled to fire prohibited missiles. So the Americans are upset with the Russians are upset with the Americans, and this has been a bit of an impasse for even going back to the Obama administration. But what's, I think, remarkably alarming here is that the Trump administration's answer to that problem is to just shred the treaty and remove all restraints on all nuclear weapons, which to me makes no sense. If the United States doesn't want Russia to build INF prohibited weapons, then why on earth would we get rid of the treaty that's keeping them from doing that? Because as you said, the immediate response to this is the United States is ending the treaty. We're going to start building INF prohibited systems, and Russia says, "Oh, great, you're going to do that. We're going to do the same thing." Now it's off to a new nuclear arms race.
Right. And this is, and my understanding, we're talking with Derek Johnson of Global Zero. My understanding is that this new generation of what are sometimes referred to as battlefield nukes, you know, low-yield nuclear weapons that could be deployed in a World War II kind of scenario, you know, an intra-Europe World War II kind of scenario, are, you know, we say that they're very small because they're on the kiloton range rather than the megaton range, but that was Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Weren't those, you know, less than a megaton nuclear devices?
Yeah, exactly. Look, there's no such thing as a small nuclear weapon. I mean, the low yield label is a bit of a misnomer. You know, a nuke is a nuke is a nuke. The bombs that annihilated Hiroshima and Nagasaki were, by today's standards, small nuclear weapons. And the weapons that the real danger about smaller nuclear weapons is that they're more tempting to use in a crisis. These sort of armchair strategists and military planners think that you can use one of these things and have a lower risk of sort of escalation to all-out nuclear war. But I think that just ignores realities on the ground. You know, the second that you introduce a nuclear weapon to a conflict, that is a global event. That's strategic. That's going to change the game, and all bets are off.
And which is the number one reason to not abandon the INF, this treaty. But the treaty is dead now. So what do we do next? Let's say, you know, in a year and a half, 2 years. Well, it'll be a little more than it'll be 2 years from now, actually. 3 weeks short of 2 years. We've got a new president, right?
So who's counting?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So we've got a new president, and the challenge is before us. You know, we really don't want an international arms race. And there is one point that I think the opponents of this treaty have made that is something that we really need to seriously consider, and that is that, you know, Russia is a relatively small country. They've got an economy the size of Texas. They can build nuclear weapons, but, you know, in the grand scheme of things on a global level, outside of the possibility of nuclear war, they are not our biggest threat. China has now, you know, the Chinese economy in the last few months has actually surpassed the American economy in terms of consumer purchasing in any case, at any rate. And China is building out their military in ways that are just absolutely rapid and breathtaking. A lot of their infrastructure has to do with military support. It's difficult to distinguish their military from their civilian stuff. There's concern that their military is involved with some of these companies that are making equipment used in the U.S. for telecommunications and even, you know, for defense. I mean, we can't build cruise missiles without Chinese chips now. So shouldn't we, you know, and China was never part of the INF, of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. So shouldn't we be trying to create a worldwide version of this rather than just a U.S.-Russia version?
Well, so a couple things. First of all, I think it's a little premature to say the INF Treaty is dead. We actually, what happened on Saturday was the U.S. announced its intent to withdraw, and that basically sets off a 6-month timer. Because it's a 6-month process to pull your country out of the treaty. So there actually is still time for the U.S. to get its act together and get back into the negotiating room, which I hope they do. And they've made some indications that they would be open to talks. Mm-hmm. Short of that, yeah, I think if come August, no sort of the U.S. and Russia don't seize on some sort of acceptable resolution to this dispute, then INF goes away, and you have an opening for the U.S. and Russia to really go gangbusters on a whole new category of weapon systems. That's a big problem. I think there are. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to happen. These are not weapon systems that the U.S. wants. Or that the U.S. needs. There's no big constituency pushing for this, and these things take time and require quite a bit of funds. There's already been a bill introduced in Congress by Senator Merkley and others that would not allow funding to go to R&D and development of these weapons. So it's not it's not.
You're going to have a hard time with that though if the Russians are building them.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. That's a fair point. As to your second point about China, yes, absolutely. Arms control across the board needs to be multilateralized. There's nine nations on Earth that have nuclear weapons. Only 2 are engaged over the last 30 years have engaged in arms control discussions. So yes, it is time to bring China into the conversation. It's time to bring India. It's time to bring Pakistan and others.
Right.
But I don't think that if you're concerned about Chinese military buildup, the answer is not to shred an agreement between the U.S. and Russia that keeps them from embarking on an arms race of their own.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing stuff. Derek Johnson, he is the executive director of Global Zero. And globalzero.org is the website. Derek JZGZ or Global Zero are the Twitter handles. Derek, thanks for dropping by.
Thanks so much.
Great talking with you and fascinating conversation. We'll be right back. We're going to get into, actually, I want to start out with this migrant families thing. This is a horror show, freak show from the administration.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Just some shocking news I'm going to share with you on the other side of the break, and your calls and more of the news of the day. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Professor, the Democratic Party, they've got a new leader, Ocasio-Cortez. Now, this is according to Roger Moore, right? Roger Moore was saying this, right on? And I'm going to tell you something.
James
if she
Bond?
endorses a presidential candidate, I'd like to see who she would endorse. Would it be Kamala Let's Make a Deal Harris? Would it be Bernie O.G. Sanders? Or would it be Joe I Love the Police Biden? But she's our new mouthpiece. Or Roscoe, I can't pronounce, how do you pronounce the name? Anyway, she's tough. Remember when she was looking for Mitch McConnell and couldn't find him? She's tough. Now, the media may not give her any coverage, okay, but she is the voice of the Democratic Party. She gets people pumped. She gets people motivated. She's not a corporate Democrat. And I hope she goes with Marianne Wilkerson. I like Marianne Wilkerson because she's got some moral, some moral class to her, which we haven't seen in a long time. But Ocasio-Cortez, that's the new mouthpiece of the Democratic Party, and I hope that she makes a loud noise and she gets a lot of people rolling, and we get this thing going and keep it going.
There you go. You met Marianne Williamson, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I agree with you, Morris. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the new leader of the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party, most of the Democratic Party has not yet figured it out. But America has.
I love you, Thom Hartmann. I love you. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, thanks a lot, Morris. And yeah, it is a big question. Who's she going to endorse? I have a feeling she's keeping her powder dry, which is fairly wise. At this point in the primary, you just don't know look at what happened with the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, who, just needs to bail out. Leave your office. In fact, I read a post over the weekend, and I haven't been able to confirm this. If anybody knows, give us a shout and let me know. Did Northam actually say that he voted for George W. Bush in 2000 and 2004? And if so, how did he even become the Democratic nominee for governor of Virginia? I, scratching my head on that one, if that's the case. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. You know how often you have elaborated on corporate greed and the billionaires and how things are really tilted unfairly? Well, I really very rarely have anything to add to that, but this is the rare occasion where I do. Okay, you know what scares me about Trump and nuclear war is the fact, like these tweets that came out from somebody in the intelligence community, I guess just this weekend, where Trump thought Sri Lanka and Bhutan were part of India. When it came to discussions of Diego Garcia, all he fixated on were questions about the beaches. He just has no intellectual curiosity. And as you know, as a reporter, I mean, a lot of things are cut off. All right, they're classified. They're top secret. Well, Donald Trump is in the one position where nothing is cut off. All corridors in the library are open. He just has no intellectual curiosity. And what worries me is like with Hillary Clinton's emails, or with anybody's emails, you don't want to be strapped to your DOD computer 24/7, okay? Nobody wants that. And they want to take executive privileges, right? They want to have a private server so they can, or they want to have a fancy cell phone so they don't have to be tied to their office. Well, what worries me is the trickle down in the corporation where, like, these intelligence chiefs are going to start taking long vacations without any interest. They're going to turn off their emails. The corporate.
I don't see that happening, Dave. I don't see that happening. But I share your concern. In fact, I want to rant about it right after the break. That Donald Trump is not. We don't have a president right now. What we've got is a crazy, grumbly old man. The get off my lawn, you young whippersnapper type of old man in the White House, and ain't a good thing. Dave, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Just did a rant about how we have actually passed a major climate change tipping point that we can't walk back from. We can't stop it. This is coming now. It is unstoppable. This first step of it, which has to do with, the destruction of major cities in the United States and all around the world. You can check this out over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, or for people who support us on YouTube as well, you can see this. Get over to patreon.com/THOMHARTMANN to check this out. We're talking about how prior to a couple of years ago, and this is how, tipping points, you can only see them in the rearview mirror. Prior to a couple of years ago, in the winter, the Arctic and Greenland, the Antarctic and Greenland, would recover some of their ice. Now they're not even doing that. It's just pausing. The melting is just pausing. That's that tipping point. And the consequences of this are going to be terrible. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thank you. Welcome back. So, boy, there is so much in the news that I really wanted to share with you, and also, I'm sure that you would probably like to rant back at me about. So, let's just get through some of this stuff. Number one, there are thousands, perhaps as many as over 10,000 children that the Trump administration viciously and cruelly, intentionally separated from their parents with intentional cruelty, in the hopes that cruelty, the word of that cruelty, would get back to Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador and cause people to say, I really don't want to put my kid through that kind of hell. I'm not going to go try to emigrate to the United States. And how do we know this? Because both Kristen Nielsen and John Kelly, her mentor, told us this. They have been right up front about this right from the get-go. We are going to inflict enormous pain on these little children and their parents. And that pain we want communicated back to people in Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador and Mexico as well, so that they don't send their kids here. So then the courts are saying you have to reunite these kids. And this story shows up in today's AP News. And why this isn't the lead story in every single newscast in America, I don't know. But this is it. It's by Elliot Spagat. It is the Associated Press, apnews.com. And the Trump administration says it would require extraordinary effort to reunite what may be thousands of children who have been separated from their parents. And even if they could, because they don't want to do the extraordinary effort, even if they could, the children would likely be emotionally harmed by being reunited with their families. You get this? They're saying, the argument they're making now, Julian White, who heads the Health and Human Services Department's efforts to reunite migrant children, said removing children from their sponsored homes to rejoin their parents, quote, would present grave child welfare concerns, end quote. He said, and I quote, it would destabilize the permanency of their existing home environment and could be traumatic to the children. In other words, they took these children, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 5-year-old, they took them away from their parents months ago, in some cases a year ago, and these kids have now been in these foster families or these relative families all this time, and they have bonded with those families. And if you take them away from those families and give them back to their natural parents, it's going to be traumatic. So we're not going to do that. Ann Maxwell, the Health and Human Services Assistant IG, said that the number is certainly larger than the 2,737 kids listed in government court documents. She says it's in the thousands. Jali Selag, the director of HHS's Office of Refugee Settlement, says it would take 8 hours to review each of its 47,000 cases between July 1st of 2017 and the June court order, last June's court order to reunite. So that's a whole year. 47,000 cases. Says it would take 8 hours per case, and that adds up to 100 employees working 471 days. She says that such an assignment would substantially imperil options unless we dramatically increase staff. Well, friggin' increase your damn staff. I mean, come on. This is obscene that we've got, what, 47,000 families tied up in this thing, where families and children, and we know we've got at least 48,000 people who have not committed any crime, who are in for-profit private prisons. They haven't committed any crime, and they're in these prisons where they're being forced to work for as little as $1 an hour or nothing. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, turns out, works, and I put that in scare quotes. He never gets to work before 11 a.m., and typically he leaves work around 1 p.m. Oh, and lunch is in the middle of that. This Aunt Krabby. Call me old-fashioned, but I expect my president to get his fat lard ass out of bed and get to work before 11 a.m. With apologies to people who are overweight. I agree with Aunt Krabby. This was leaked to Axios and the schedules, and it shows that he spends 60% of his scheduled time in what's called executive time, which is the White House euphemism for tweeting and watching TV and making phone calls to his friends. This is nuts. This is nuts. And meanwhile, I'm getting these insane emails from Donald Trump. I got to share a couple of those with you after the break. And then I want to get into well, we got just a whole pile of stuff.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And then I want to get into floors, not nets. I'll make sense of that as we continue through the program. Maybe we'll push that to the third hour. We'll see, but stick around. Our book today is Midnight in Chernobyl, The Untold Story of the World's Greatest Nuclear Disaster by Adam Higginbotham. This is from the prologue. Saturday, April 26, 1986, 4:16 p.m., Chernobyl Atomic Energy Station, Ukraine. Senior Lieutenant Alexander Logachev loved radiation the way other men love their wives. Tall and good-looking, 26 years old, with close-cropped dark hair and ice blue eyes, Logashov had joined the Soviet Army when he was still a boy. They had trained him well. The instructors from the military academy outside Moscow taught him with lethal poisons and unshielded radiation. He traveled to the testing grounds of Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan and to the desolate East Urals trace, where the fallout from a clandestine radioactive accident still poisoned the landscape. Eventually, Logashov's training took him even to the remote and forbidden islands of Novaya Zemlya, high in the Arctic Circle, and ground zero for the detonation of the terrible Tsar Bomba, the largest thermonuclear device in history. Now, as the lead radiation reconnaissance officer of the 427th Red Banner Mechanized Regiment of the Kiev District Civil Defense Force, Logashev knew how to protect himself and his three-man crew from nerve agents, biological weapons, gamma rays, and hot particles, by doing their work just as the textbooks dictated, by trusting his dosimetry equipment, and, when necessary, reaching for the nuclear, bacterial, and chemical warfare medical kits stored in the cockpit of their armored car. But he also believed that the best protection was psychological. These men who allowed themselves to fear radiation were most at risk. But those who came to love and appreciate its spectral presence, to understand its caprices, could endure even the most intense gamma bombardment and emerge as healthy as before. As he sped through the suburbs of Kiev that morning at the head of a column of more than 30 vehicles summoned to an emergency at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Logashev had every reason to feel confident. The spring air blowing through the hatches of his armored scout car carried the smell of the trees and the freshly cut grass. His men, gathered on the parade ground just the night before for their monthly inspection, were drilled and ready. At his feet, a battery of radiological detection instruments, including a newly installed electronic device twice as sensitive as the old model, murmured softly, revealing nothing unusual in the atmosphere around them. But as they finally approached the plant later that morning, it became clear that something extraordinary had happened. The alarm on the radiation dosimeter first sounded as they passed the concrete signpost marking the perimeter of the power station grounds, and the lieutenant gave orders to stop the vehicle and log their findings. 51 roentgens per hour. If they waited here just 60 minutes, they would all absorb the maximum dose of radiation permitted Soviet troops during wartime. They drove on, following the line of high-voltage transmission towers that marched toward the horizon in the direction of the power plant. Their readings climbed still further before falling again. Then, as the armored car rumbled along the concrete bank of the station's cooling canal, the outline of the fourth unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant finally became visible, and Logashev and his crew gazed at it in silence. The roof of the 20-story building had been torn open, its other upper levels blackened and collapsed into heaps of rubble. They could see shattered panels of ferroconcrete, tumbled blocks of graphite, and here and there the glittering metal casings of fuel assemblies from the core of a nuclear reactor. A cloud of steam drifted from the wreckage into the sunlit sky. Yet they had orders to conduct a full reconnaissance of the plant. Their armored car crawled counterclockwise around the complex at 10 kilometers an hour. Sergeant Vlaskin called out the radiation readings from the new instruments, and Logashev scribbled them down on a map, hand-drawn on a sheet of parchment paper in ballpoint pen and colored marker. 1 roentgen per hour, then 2, then 3. They turned left and the figures began to rise quickly. 10, 30, 50, 100. 250 roentgens an hour, the sergeant shouted, his eyes widening. Comrade Lieutenant, he began, and pointed at the radiometer. Logashev looked down at the digital readout and felt his scalp prickle with terror. 2,080 roentgens an hour, an impossible number. Logashev struggled to remain calm and remember the textbook, to conquer his fear. But his training failed him, and the lieutenant heard himself screaming in panic at the driver, petrified that the vehicle would stall. Why are you going this way, you son of a bee? Are you out of your effing mind? If this thing dies, we'll all be corpses in 15 minutes. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Soviet Prometheus. At the slow beat of approaching rotor blades, black birds rose into the sky, scattering over the frozen meadows and the pearly knots of creeks and ponds lacing the Pripyat River basin. Far below, standing knee-deep in snow, his breath lingering in heavy clouds, Viktor Brukhanov awaited the arrival of the nomenklatura from Moscow. When the helicopter touched down, the delegation of ministers and Communist Party officials trudged together over the icy field. The savage cold gnawed at their heavy woolen coats and nipped beneath their tall fur hats. the head of the Ministry of Energy and Electrification of the USSR, and senior party bosses from the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine joined Brukhanov at the spot where their audacious new project was to begin. Just 34 years old, clever and ambitious, a dedicated party man, Brukhanov had come to western Ukraine with orders to begin building what would become the greatest nuclear power station on Earth. Midnight at Chernobyl.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann here with you. I wanted to get into I was talking about the whole Trump thing. Trump is not showing up for work, but he is sending out emails. I got a bunch of them. Dear Fred, ever since our incredible movement began, the Democrats have been against us. Is this coming from the President of the United States? Do you remember emails like this from Obama? I mean, no, neither do I. Bush? No, neither do I. Over the past few weeks, they have taken their obstruction and radicalism to a whole new un-American level. I'll tell you what's un-American, Trump. Un-American is calling the other party un-American. First, they refused to put the safety of Americans at our southern border above their own political interests. And then they disinvited me from speaking at the People's State of the Union at the original date. As your commander-in-chief, I will always put the safety of America first. Yeah, right. Yeah, therefore, pull us out of the INF Treaty, right? And whether they like it or not, I'm delivering your State of the Union address on February 5th. Last year, we had 30,000 American patriots. Last year, a year ago, he was raising money on the State of the Union. This year, he's doing it again. Last year, we had over 30,000 American patriots contribute to have their name proudly displayed live during my State of the Union address, and this year, I expect to double that. You could be the first name displayed, Fred Flintstone. Make a contribution of $24 in the next 3 hours to be one of the first to have your name proudly displayed live during the State of the Union address. So here he is. Here's your huckster-in-chief selling the State of the Union for only $24. I got another one. This one just came this morning. Tomorrow, dear Fred, tomorrow President Trump will deliver his State of the Union address, and that will go down in history as the speech that saved America from the great crisis on our southern border. Democrats and the mainstream media have done everything they can to delegitimize the terrible crisis at our southern border. But tomorrow, whether they like it or not, the president will deliver the truth to the American people. By the way, we noticed your name wasn't on the list of supporters that we display live during the speech. Fred, don't miss out on this incredible opportunity. Cement your name in history. Please make a contribution of $42. Oh, the price went up. In the next 3 hours to have your name proudly displayed live during the president's State of the Union address. Incredible. Incredible. Mary in Sunrise Beach, Missouri. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today? Mary, you are on the air.
Well, Tom, I wanted to speak to the arms, treaties and all that.
Right.
I read in an article in Harper's Magazine 30 years ago, and the title of the article was United States Arms Dealer to the World. I submit that the major portion of our economy is based on delivering weapons to the rest of the world. And the U.S. Politicians have convinced us that actually we deliver agriculture and food. But actually, that is run totally by Monsanto, who is trying to poison all of us. So I just wanted to, and I know you got to keep things short, but we have been the arms dealer to the world for like 40 or 50 years, and that is a very big problem when your entire economy is based on creating weapons.
Well, Mary, if our entire economy was based on creating weapons, I would completely agree with you. But it's not.
And
the vast majority of our economy, Mary,
Yemen,
the vast majority of our economy is not based on making weapons. The vast majority of our economy has to do with service industries, people helping each other out, people feeding each other. The healthcare industry is about a $2 trillion piece of our economy. There's whole bunches of our economy. The weapons industry is a few $100 billion. That's substantial. That's huge. And we are one of the major weapons dealers of the world. The United States, Israel, Russia, France, I believe, are the major weapons makers, and China is now getting in that business. So there's something to what you say, but when we exaggerate things like that, we just lose credibility. Beth in Valparaiso, Indiana. Hey, Beth, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Let me just get you on speakerphone. Okay, are we there?
Yeah, we are.
All right. All right, Tom. I just wanted to comment on your news story regarding the border. There's another news story that perhaps is just as bad or worse as Trump being let off the hook. And that is that many of these children's fathers, brothers, and uncles are on a hunger strike right now, and they are being force-fed.
Yes, we talked about this last Friday.
Goose.
Yeah,
Gooses.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's at the minimum 19 people, and possibly as many as 90, who are basically committing suicide in these detention centers. They call them detention centers. I call them concentration camps or internment camps. And they have not committed any crime at all. They came to the United States seeking asylum. That is a legal thing to do. And we're paying, hundreds of dollars a day to private for-profit corporations to house them, and then those corporations are recycling that money back to Republican politicians. It's obscene.
It's the most. It's one of the. It's almost worse than what FDR did in World War II. In that, I mean, it's just.
I think it's far worse than what FDR did, Beth, because FDR.
It's far worse. You're right.
We were in a war. Right then, and FDR had concerns about the loyalty of Japanese citizens. It was racist. It was misplaced in retrospect. But the United States had been attacked at Pearl Harbor, right? There was a crisis that had to do with Japan, and there is no crisis on our southern border. And these children and their parents are not criminals. And and this is being done just as a shout out to Donald Trump's racist base. That's a hell of a lot worse than what FDR did. FDR was not seeking political gain from interning the Japanese. In fact, he lost political points because of it.
I agree with you 100%. Could I mention one more thing about the folks who are coming across the border from the South?
Sure.
Is that let's not forget that if you want to talk about who belongs in the United States, these folks are 95% Native American people, okay? Their families have lived on this continent for like 30,000, 40,000 years, something like that. So who belongs here for real? We came over in times of distress from Europe. They're coming here in their time of distress, and it's time for us to pay attention to the human rights issues.
I agree. Beth, well said. Thank you very much for the call. Carolyn in Hemet, California. Hey, Carolyn, what's on your mind?
Hi, I just wanted to speak on the children and the reunification with their parents. And when I was a child, I was placed in foster care because we had become so impoverished that my mother could no longer tend to us and was so depressed she couldn't tend to us. Just being placed, and this was a wonderful foster family, a beautiful, kind, wonderful foster family who took my sister and I in. It took 3 years for us to get back. This has marred and marked my life. I'm 65 years old. I have spent endless hours on psychiatric couches. And I wanted to talk about someone else that gets hurt in this that I came to understand. When later, I wound up working for child abuse as a child abuse investigator in Florida. The foster parents, the wonderful foster parents, I requested of my director at that time to allow me to train them up as foster parents on one issue, and it was understanding that the children they were tending to were these children would have problems expressing and being able to reciprocate all the love they were being given, because we felt guilty that we are betraying our parents when we start to fall in love with our foster parents that are wonderful to us.
Right.
And when I left, they sent me endless amounts of letters, and I could not write them back because I just wanted to forget that I had ever been separated from my parents. from my mother and how long it had taken to get back.
Wow.
So this is just so odious what's going on.
This is criminal.
You know, my situation was so different, and as I said, I was so well treated. I got to meet the parents that I was going to be with. There was a process. These kids being ripped apart as they are, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, well, you said it very well, Carol, and thank you for sharing your story with us. That's profound. Thank you so much. And I hope your healing continues apace. Pat in Corte Madera, California. Hey, Pat, what's up?
Hi, I'm actually in Carbondale, Illinois this week because I am an author who writes about Buckminster Fuller, and I was just hearing the woman talk about how America has become one of the world's largest weapons dealers, and sort of this overall sense in America today, wondering who are we and why are we doing what we're doing and why are we not doing what we should be doing, which is taking on the fossil fuel industry. And what I would love to say to a lot of people listening who I think are just grasping for what they can do or what they can hold on to, it's that it is all connected. The human rights, the peace and justice, the environmental issues is all related to the fact that the people of America have lost control and we need to get it back. And it feels like it's happening. I really recommend people read some of the things that Buckminster Fuller wrote. So 50 years ago, he wrote A Manual for Spaceship Earth, which basically explained a lot of what is happening today.
Yeah, I agree. It was brilliant. Also, the Grunch of Giants was brilliant. It was about corporate personhood. Pat, I'm sorry we're out of time, but thank you. We'll be back. Bob Ney is going to check in with us in about 4 minutes with Talk Media News.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're live. It's Monday. The Super Bowl was yesterday. Interesting game. We'll be back. And welcome back. Raul in El Paso, Texas. Hey, Raul, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I'm thrilled to be talking to you. I love your show.
Thank you.
You are one of my liberal media heroes, along with Bill Moyers and Amy Goodman and Stephanie Miller, Rachel Maddow. I thank you so much for your work.
You're welcome. What's up?
Like you, I come from a business and media background. I'm an entrepreneur in the financial services industry, and I once had a radio talk program called Everybody's a Philosopher, and it was one of the few liberal voices in our city here in El Paso, Texas. By the way, I am here on the border. I just had supper Sunday night at Juarez, and I traveled to Chihuahua a couple of weeks ago. Let me tell you, Tom, there is no crisis on the border other than the one that's inflicted on these poor economic refugees seeking asylum here in the United States.
Well, most of them aren't even economic refugees, Raul. They're fleeing gang violence and death threats.
Right. I come from Beto land, but I'm from his father's generation, and we're right here. We got one of the largest military installations in the country here called Fort Bliss. We used to have an Air Force base called Briggs Air Force Base. So we know about Russians. I was scared the heck about the Russians when I was a little kid. We had air exercises here in El Paso in case, we went to World War III, which in case we would have been bombed because we had bombers flying out of here on their way to Russia if ever came to that.
Yeah.
So pretty scary here. But anyway, I'll get to my point. I've got a couple of proposals. One is called Occupy Congress. And people can see it by Googling my name, Raul Amaya, and they can find the article that came out in USA Today, and it's called An Idea for Reforming Congress. And it gets down to the idea of drafting via a voluntary lottery 535 citizens to serve in Congress for 1 4-year term. All they'd have to do to qualify is to show that they vote. We want voters, and this will incent people to vote in the future, and also that they could pass a citizenship exam, which I imagine Donald Trump couldn't do if we gave it to him right now.
I doubt he could.
That's what it's basically about, that idea.
Yeah.
And it would change a lot of things, Tom, and principally it would adhere to the Constitution because it was the Founding Fathers' idea. They argued this is a big issue with them, the number of representatives to the population. And Washington was calling for one for every 40,000. Madison was arguing for one for every 30,000. We have now one for every 773,000.
Right.
Americans.
So you're arguing that we should go back to the system that the Greeks used, which they called it the polis, as I recall, and every year they had a lottery and they pulled 6,001 names, and if you didn't show up when your name, and you were basically a legislator for a year, and if you didn't show up, the word that they used to describe the persons whose names were chosen and didn't show up, it was idiota, which is the root of our word idiot. So that's what you're suggesting.
Well, with a modification, because the Democrats and Republicans would still be there, see? So they would continue to do their thing as they always have, but there would be just 535 citizens in there in addition to that. So it would break up...
So you want to double the size of Congress?
Yes, it would double the size of Congress. It would weaken the power of politicians, of money in the system.
Yeah. That's fascinating stuff. Well, we're out of time, but it's fascinating stuff. Thanks for the call. You know, we've talked about that before on this program, you know, how the Greeks did it, and, you know, could that work? It seemed to have worked out for the Greeks for a while, but then at some point it didn't. We'll be back with Bob Ney with Talk Media News right after this. Stick around. So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program? All 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like. You know, it's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, you know, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com. /Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, you know, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by GoatsForTheOldGoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is Bob Ney, the author of Sideswiped, former congressman from Ohio. Hey, Bob.
Hello, Tom.
So what's up in the world today?
Well, we have the Super Bowl of politics coming tomorrow, of course, at 9 p.m., the State of the Union. How much do you want to bet? I don't have any in on this that's going to happen, that the president is going to turn around on national TV, and, of course, the Speaker of the House and the Vice President sit behind him at the dais. How much you want to bet he's going to turn around and extend his hand out to Speaker Pelosi and offer some kind of deal?
I think that might be a theatrical flourish.
Of course.
That might blow up in his face, so he probably wouldn't do it.
I'm just sitting, I have no inside track to this. I'm just thinking this through.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't think he has the political or theatrical instincts to do that. I think what we're going to hear is a rant about, you know, rapists south of the border and duct tape on women and stuff.
Yeah, well, he's going to. Well, he's also going to. We do know this. This is at least some sources that I picked up. That he's going to try to show the unifying President Trump and the unifying message. Of course, he set the tone in the last 2 days with his tweets on immigration and saying that that the Democrats just don't get it, and talking about drugs and crime across the border, then dispatching troops. Yesterday, the initiation of 3,700 and some troops to the border. So obviously, it's not a unifying message before the State of the Union, but he's going to try to say he wants to bring unity, to the Congress and the country.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Of course.
I'm curious if you're hearing from anybody. I mean, I just was, jaw drop astounded. This AP story yesterday, where the administration is now saying, yes, we have thousands of children we've torn away from their parents. It's too much work to reunite them. It's going to take, there's 47,000 cases, and it would take 100 employees working 471 days to review all of these kids and reunite them. And besides that, even if they could do it, quote, the children would likely be emotionally harmed by being taken away from their foster parents and given back to their parents because they've had enough time to bond to their foster parents. This is as obscene as it gets, Bob. Is there any blowback happening in D.C. to this kind of crap?
No. Will be frank with you. That story did not get the attention. I mean, that's one of those stories that, and it may develop, don't get me wrong, Tom, but that's one of those stories that you would think there would be an immediate outcry and even a potential immediate investigation, demanded as to what happens, because these are not children that have been legally, taken and been some ad litem, and then all of a sudden they're put into permanent care. They're in foster care. That's not permanent care. It was never designed to be permanent care. But this would be a permanent move by the administration, because then what happens when they deport the parents?
Yeah. No, this is obscene beyond description. This is, and we're talking, and we now know that we've got 48,000 immigrants or refugees actually in our detention camps, in our concentration camps. And the 2/3 of them are in concentration camps run by private for-profit companies that are making billions of dollars off this. And Donald Trump is getting political hay off this from his white racist right-wing base. But beyond that, I mean, when Hitler started putting people in camps long before the death camps, I'm talking about, the labor camps, the internment camps. He got a political boost for that. I'm at least among his base, I'm guessing Trump is getting the same. This just blows my mind. Anyhow, what else is going on, Bob?
Well, and Tom, also nobody's questioning. It's the human tragedy side. Nobody's questioning even the economic side, because you made a good point. These are private companies. Some of them are charging. I mean, this is amazing when you think about it. $700 per day per person.
Right. Right. It's
that kind of charge.
It's an obscenely and insanely profitable business, which is why they want to expand it. Trump wants to expand it, and it just blows my mind.
Right. The foreign policy is all over the place. Not that it hasn't been, but it even gets more bizarre. The president has now announced, on top of the course, there's the Syria withdrawal, and then he goes contrary to his intel people. What they're saying on it. We know that. Then there was the issue of North Korea, and we know that. Now, the issue of Iran came up, where he, of course, says that Iran is the most dangerous entity on earth, and not that the government is a walk in the park, but obviously he doesn't think Saudi Arabia is dangerous, but he thinks Iran's dangerous, and that goes contrary to exactly what Director Coates said the other day, that Iran doesn't have nuclear capability because of the obviously the Obama agreement that he had with Iran to decrease the centrifuges. Now, having said all of that, we still sponsored a worldwide conference on the danger of Iran, and the president announced yesterday that we're going to have troops in Iraq to do what? To watch Iran.
Yeah.
And what has happened in Iraq, Tom, frankly, we are pushing ourselves out of the sphere of influence in Iraq, period, because this fight with Iran internally in Iraq, actually both countries have been hurt by it. The Iraqi government itself has grown tired of it. You have
Iraq is now an ally to Iran.
Right, correct.
I mean, the first big business to open in Iraq was the Bank of Iran, or the Bank of whatever the city in Iran.
Right, of Iran. But he's going to keep troops there to watch Iran.
Yeah,
which
right.
Iraq doesn't want done.
Right. This is another example that Donald Trump doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Bob Ney with Talk Media News. Thank you, Congressman. Great talking with you. We'll be back. We're gonna get into Medicare for all and a few other things. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
book today, we're reading from Elon Papp's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. This is from the preface. It's titled The Red House. The Red House was a typical early Tel Avivian building, the pride of the Jewish builders and craftsmen who toiled over in the 1920s. It had been designed to house the head office of the local Workers' Council. It remained such until toward the end of 1947, it became the headquarters of the Haganah, the main Zionist underground militia in Palestine. Located near the sea on Yarkon Street in the northern part of Tel Aviv, the building formed another fine addition to the first Hebrew city on the Mediterranean, the White City, as its literati and pundits affectionately called it. For in those days, unlike today, the immaculate whiteness of his houses still bathed the town as a whole in the opulent brightness so typical of Mediterranean port cities of that era and that region. It was a sight for sore eyes, elegantly fusing Bauhaus motifs with native Palestinian architecture in an admixture that was called Levantine, in the least derogatory sense of the term. Such too was the Red House, its simple rectangular features graced with frontal arches that framed the entrance and supported the balconies of its two upper stories. It was either its association with the workers' movement that had inspired the adjective red, or its pinkish tinge that it acquired during sunset that had given the house its name. The former was more fitting, as the building continued to be associated with the Zionist version of socialism when, in the 1970s, it became the main office for Israel's kibbutzim movement. Houses like this, important historical remnants of the mandatory period, prompted UNESCO in 2003 to designate Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site. Today, the house is no longer there, a victim of development, which has razed this architectural relic to the ground to make room for a car park next to the new Sheraton Hotel. Thus, in this street, too, no traces left of the White City, which it has slowly transmogrified into the sprawling, polluted, extravagant metropolis that is the modern Tel Aviv. In this building on a cold Wednesday afternoon, 10 March 1948, a group of 11 men, veteran Zionist leaders, together with young military Jewish officers, put the final touches on a plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That same evening, military orders were dispatched to the units on the ground to prepare for the systematic expulsion of Palestinians from vast areas of the country. The orders came from a detailed description of the methods to be employed to forcibly evict the people: large-scale intimidation, laying siege to and bombarding villages and population centers, setting fire to homes, properties, goods, expulsion, demolition, and finally planting mines among the rubble to prevent any of the expelled inhabitants from returning. Each unit was issued with its own list of villages and neighborhoods as the targets of the master plan. Codenamed Plan D, Dalet in Hebrew, this was the fourth and final version of less substantial plans that outlined the fate the Zionists had in store for Palestine and consequently for its native population. The previous three schemes had articulated only obscurely how the Zionist leadership contemplated dealing with the presence of so many Palestinians living in the land that the Jewish national movement coveted as its own. This fourth and last blueprint spelled it out clearly and unambiguously. Quote, "The Palestinians have to go," end quote. In the words of one of the first historians to note the significance of that plan, Simcha Flapan, the military campaign against the Arabs, including the conquest and destruction of the rural areas, was set forth in the Haganah's Plan Dalet. The aim for the plan was in fact the destruction of both the rural and urban areas of Palestine. As the first chapters of this book will attempt to show, this plan was both the inevitable product of the Zionist ideological impulse to have an exclusively Jewish presence in Palestine, and a response to developments on the ground once the British cabinet had decided to end the mandate. Clashes with local Palestinian militias provided the perfect context and pretext for implementing the ideological vision of an ethnically cleansed Palestine. The Zionist policy was first based on retaliation against Palestinian attacks in February of 1947, and it transformed into an initiative to ethnically cleanse the country as a whole in March of 1948. Once the decision was taken, it took 6 months to complete the mission. When it was over, more than half of Palestine's native population, close to 800,000 people, had been uprooted. 531 villages had been destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods had been emptied of their inhabitants. The plan decided upon on 10 March 1948, and above all its systematic implementation in the following months, was a clear-cut case of ethnic cleansing operation regarded under international law today as a crime against humanity. After the Holocaust, it has become impossible to conceal large-scale crimes against humanity. Our modern communication-driven world, especially since the upsurge of electronic media, no longer allows human-made catastrophes to remain hidden from the public eye or to be denied. And yet one such crime has been erased almost totally from the global public memory: the disposition of the Palestinians in 1948 by Israel. This, the most formative element in the modern history of the land of Palestine, has ever since been systematically denied and is still today not recognized as an historical fact, let alone acknowledged as a crime that needs to be confronted politically as well as morally. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity, and the people who perpetrate it today are considered criminals to be brought before special tribunals. It may be difficult to decide how one ought to refer to or deal with in the legal sphere those who initiated and perpetrated ethnic cleansing in Palestine in 1948, but it's impossible to reconstruct their crimes. Anyhow, it continues the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
Just did a rant about how we have actually passed a major climate change tipping point that we can't walk back from. We can't stop it. This is coming now. It is unstoppable. This first step of it, which has to do with, the destruction of major cities in the United States and all around the world. You can check this out over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, or for people who support us on YouTube as well, you can see this. Get over to patreon.com/THOMHARTMANN to check this out. We're talking about how prior to a couple of years ago, and this is how, tipping points, you can only see them in the rearview mirror. Prior to a couple of years ago, in the winter, the Arctic and Greenland, the Antarctic and Greenland, would recover some of their ice. Now they're not even doing that. It's just pausing. The melting is just pausing. That's that tipping point. And the consequences of this are going to be terrible. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and there's a lot of news going on, a lot of stuff to talk about today. But net neutrality is a pretty important one. This is basically the internet has become our communications commons. It's how most of us communicate with each other via email and messages and things like that. It is how many of us, if not most of us, get most of our news these days. It's a big deal. And on the line with us is Yosef Getachew with Common Cause. Yosef is the Media and Democracy Program Director. Yosef, welcome to the program, and an attorney. Welcome to the program, and am I pronouncing your name right?
Yes, my name is Yosef Getachew, and thanks for having me, Thom.
Getachew. Okay, thank you, Yosef. So tell us about what is happening right now in this. There's this lawsuit against the FCC, I believe, about them blowing up the net neutrality situation. What's going on?
Sure. So just to give everyone a bit of background, back in 2015, the Federal Communications Commission adopted a set of net neutrality rules that basically told your internet service provider that you could not block or throttle any content or charge special fees to create fast lanes, giving certain websites preferential treatment over others. They use a legal framework called Title II of the Telecommunications Act, which, not to get too wonky, basically says that broadband is a telecommunication service, or it's a telephone service where data is just being transferred from one point to another. And that was the basic legal framework.
Yeah, if I could, the way that this worked with the phone company was that basically they said, to the telephone companies, which is what Title II is designed for, you may not listen in on somebody's phone call and bill them based on who they're talking to. You can't charge less to talk to grandma or more to talk to your employer or more to talk to a customer. You can separate business and personal calls, with different billing schemes. But, that's, again, not based on listening in on what you're doing. And so with the internet, they're saying basically the same thing. You can't charge me a different price if I'm sending an email to my wife than you do if I'm doing it for business. Or you can't charge me a different price or deliver information to me at a different speed or even block information depending on where it's coming from. Everything has to be treated the same. Do I have that right?
That's correct. It's this idea that all data within the network has to be treated equally. Your ISP can't all of a sudden slow down Netflix in favor of Hulu, or
right.
it can all of a sudden.
And all that changed a year ago when the former Verizon attorney who Trump had put in as head of the FCC decided, to hell with that, I want to make some more money for Verizon.
Yeah, so in 2017, you had FCC Chairman Ajit Pai not only repeal that framework we had in 2015, but completely remove the FCC's authority over broadband. So since 2017, we haven't had any rules that could prevent or prohibit your ISP from blocking, throttling, or engaging in these paid prioritization schemes. But more importantly, there hasn't been any cop on the beat actually looking into these bad behaviors, just because the FCC said flat out, we have no authority over this space. We can't do anything. And so you're pretty much on your own as a consumer, and you're subject to the whims of these monopoly telecommunications and cable providers who are providing you with internet. Mm-hmm. And so what we saw was a number of public interest groups, state attorney generals, companies that provide website services like Mozilla sue the FCC last year for completely repealing the rules and removing its authority over broadband. Mm-hmm. And so throughout the course of litigation, we had oral arguments in court on Friday. And what we saw from oral arguments was the FCC completely and utterly failed to defend its repeal of net neutrality. Just to get back to your question about telephone services and broadband services, Judge Millett, one of the judges on the panel, flat out asked the FCC counsel, how is this different from telephone networks? Isn't data just being transferred from one point to another? And, he tried to explain, well, information is being transformed and it's not the same as telephone. But she actually pressed on this line of questioning, saying, well, if I'm using the telephone and say I want to call my pharmaceutical company to get a prescription and I'm pressing a bunch of numbers and I'm all of a sudden filling that prescription, isn't that the same as going onto the internet and going to different websites and getting my prescription through a website and making a couple clicks? And he couldn't answer this basic question. It just goes to the reason that, broadband is a telecommunications service. It's information.
So Joseph, are you optimistic now that the court is going to knock down Ajit Pai's destruction of net neutrality?
Well, I'm confident that the attorneys who represent the public interest organizations and the state attorney generals and the corporations, the companies who provide website services made very, very strong arguments.
No, I get all that, but do you think that, that it's going to prevail?
I can say right now we're confident. I think there was a lot of good questions that were asked that poked holes at the FCC's arguments. They couldn't defend the basic classification of internet, which gets to the crux of how they were trying to repeal this. And so we'll have to wait and see. I'm just very hopeful and confident.
When will we know?
That, the court schedules take time. I would say maybe the next few months, this summer. We'll have to wait and see.
Are there other? We're talking with Joseph Katachu, who is the Media and Democracy Program Director with Common Cause and an attorney, commoncause.org, the website. What can people do who want to help push this along and bring back net neutrality?
So there's a couple things that people can do. Common Cause is a nonprofit organization with 1.2 million grassroots members and activists. And one of the things we do, we encourage individuals to speak out when we see these injustices by people who abuse power. And so, if you are a stakeholder that cares about this, talking to your member of Congress, talking to your state representative, talking to local representatives, explaining why you care about net neutrality, because this issue just affects everyone in so many different ways. Whether you are a small business owner, whether you are a student in school and you need the internet to do your homework, whether you are trying to get a diverse source of news on the internet, conservative or liberal. The internet is so ubiquitous that it impacts our democracy in so many ways. So engaging with different lawmakers on this issue is critical.
Okay, so reach out to your members of Congress. The telephone number for the Congressional Switchboard is 202-225-3121. Joseph, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And people can also find more information over at commoncause.org, of course. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So Trump's schedule proves he's not only an idiot, he's a slacker in chief. What do we do about that? And when should we stop calling it a net and start calling it a floor? I'll tell you about that after the break. And welcome back. Michael in Los Angeles. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Fine. How you doing, Tom?
Good.
I was calling because about this Virginia governor. They came up with some pictures of a Ku Klux Klanman guy in his blackface.
Yeah.
The thing is that I think we rushing the judgment on him. Okay. And the reason is because not only is he now denying it, right, but he's explaining why he admitted to it before because he dressed up like Michael Jackson and he did
in blackface. He's saying, "Oh, that incident of my being in blackface in my college yearbook, that doesn't matter because I'm pretty sure that wasn't me because when I know that I dressed up in blackface a year later to play Michael Jackson, I remember it vividly." Come on, Michael. He just admitted to doing this.
No, he didn't admit to doing it. He said he admitted to dressing up like Michael Jackson and docking his face. That he didn't admit to.
So that's
that guy
so
picture.
number one, he says yes, I was in blackface, and number two, for a picture to be on your yearbook page, you have to select that picture, and he wrote the clip that presumably that goes underneath it. Let's just have a beer.
Is, though, right? Why are we rushing to? How come we can't do some more investigation? Was that actually him in the picture? Who was the other guy that's in the picture?
It doesn't matter, Michael. He chose that picture for his yearbook.
Give him the chance of defending himself.
He has done that. He has done that. He came out and he said, "I'm very sorry. That was a terrible mistake." And then he came out and said, "It wasn't me because this other time I was in blackface, I remembered it, and that one I don't remember." These are not answers. These are not defenses. And I get it, Michael. I get the weird thing about all this is if this had happened in the Republican Party, right? Like Brian Kemp, the guy who stole the election from Stacey Abrams down in Georgia, he was in photos and reaching out to a guy who was calling for the assassination of black people, right? You got Mitch McConnell being photographed in front of a giant Confederate flag. He's now saying, "Well, I wouldn't do that today. That was 30 years ago." And the Republicans aren't saying, "Oh, my God, Mitch, that's it. You're out of here." I get that the Democratic Party has higher standards. And sometimes those higher standards bite us in the butt, as in the case of Al Franken, where Kirsten Gillibrand basically pushed him out of the Senate before there was any kind of adjudication. That, I think, we went too far, we went too fast. I absolutely do. But in this case, I don't see how, what conceivable answer, Michael, could he give that would justify his continuing as governor?
Was that him in those pictures? And that's what he's saying. He's claiming he's not those person in that picture.
So, okay, Michael, stop for a second. Let's say it's not him in the picture. He chose that picture and gave it to the yearbook editor and wrote the caption and said, "Put this on my page." It's the biggest picture on the page. Said, "Put this on my page." Isn't that in and of itself enough to disqualify him?
That story. I haven't heard it. Okay, so I came to the.
No, that's how it works with yearbooks.
Huh?
That's how it works with yearbooks. When a yearbook is being put together, the yearbook editor comes to you and says, "What pictures do you want on your yearbook page?"
Well, let me say this too, right? None of those pictures should have been in anybody's.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Michael, thank you for the call. I just don't see this as a debate. I'm sorry. I get it that Northam is trying to hang on. I predict that, by this time tomorrow, he will no longer be governor. It's 18 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in the news of the day right after this. So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program, all 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? It's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com /Thom Hartmann, THOMHARTMANN, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's a couple of things that I wanted to just lay on the table and have a conversation with you about. I mentioned, and in fact, I ranted extensively, I suppose, about how brutal and inhuman this Trump refugee separation program is, and now they're claiming that they can't reunite these children because A, it's too much work, and B, even if they do, it's going to damage them emotionally. That's bizarre. I don't know how to describe it beyond bizarre. Meanwhile, we've got, some, Sherrod Brown came out last week and said, oh, we can't do Medicare for all yet. Let's start with Medicare, for everybody over 50. Well, I get what he's talking about, and he's talking political realities and things, but you don't, I'm sorry, Sherrod, he shot himself in the foot terribly with that. We literally have tried everything except Medicare for all, in this country. And we're the only country in the world, the developed country in the world, that doesn't have health care for all its citizens. It's crazy. 36% of Americans have high deductible plans where they can have to pay more than $4,000 out of pocket. 36% of Americans. Half of Americans, keep in mind, can't afford a $500 expense. 160 million people who are covered by employer-sponsored programs have an average deductible of $1,400 and $2,700 for family coverage. That's nuts, too, when most Americans just can't afford it. So not only do we need Medicare for all, but we also need to start soaking the rich. I mean, it's just very simple. And the reason why is not just because they're rich. It's because it's the right thing to do. It stabilizes economies. If you look back at the time when we had a top income tax rate of 70 to 90%, that was from the 1930s until the 1980s, we had the most stable economy, and it was growing, and middle incomes were growing. That built the middle class. That tax built the middle class. And when Reagan repealed that tax, he did so based on a lie that by cutting taxes, you're going to raise tax revenue. It was a lie. Sam Brownback tried it in Kansas 4 years ago. It destroyed Kansas. Ronald Reagan tried it in America. It destroyed America. We now have a $21 trillion national debt because of Trump's tax cuts, Bush's tax cuts, and Trump's tax cuts. Reagan's tax cuts, Bush tax cuts, and Trump's tax cuts. And now a Fox News survey found 70% of Americans agree with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. 70% tax after $10 million bucks. 70% of Americans, 54% of Republicans agree with this. Dan Crenshaw, the congressman from Texas, during the big game, he tweets out, should someone propose a 70% tax on the Patriots so NFL competition is more fair and equal? Just asking for a friend. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, she replies to him, well, the average NFL salary is $2.1 million, so most players would never experience a 70% rate. The owners who refuse to hire Kaepernick, however, they would. See that? God bless you, Alexandria. God bless you, AOC. She really is the new spokesperson for the Democratic Party. The rest of the Democrats haven't figured it out, but she is the person. Meanwhile, we've got this, raising taxes. Then Bernie, this is incredible. Mitch McConnell, Chuck Grassley, and John Thune just rolled out a plan to eliminate the estate tax. This would be a $39 billion tax cut for the Koch brothers, a $63 billion tax break for the Walton family. And Bernie is having nothing to do with it. In fact, he's proposing an alternative. He tweeted out, he said, instead of repealing the estate tax, we should substantially increase this tax on the multimillionaires and billionaires of this country. And in doing so, not only come up with much needed revenue to address the needs of working families, but also to reduce wealth inequality in America. And that's what I'm going to do this week. And under Sanders' bill, inherited estates worth more than $3.5 million will be taxed at 45%. And if it's over $1 billion, 77%. Now, there's two tricks that the rich people are going to deploy their shills onto television and radio. You will hear these two tricks being played really, really big on right-wing talk radio and Fox News and in right-wing blogs and things, because it worked before. Right, they did this, during the Reagan time, tax cuts. They did this when Bill Clinton tried to raise taxes. They did this when George Bush was going to lower taxes. The first is they're going to say that a 77% tax rate on inheritances or 70% tax rate on billionaires is going to hit you. It's going to take you. No, sorry. If you're not leaving an estate worth more than you and your spouse $7 million, you're going to see no tax, zero. And if your income is under $10 million a year, you'll never see that 70% tax rate. So number one, they're going to lie to you about that. They're going to tell you they're trying to tax you. No, they're trying to tax the Koch brothers and the Walton family. And second, they're going to say rich people earned their money. I'm sorry, these kids who are inheriting billions of dollars from their parents did absolutely nothing to earn that money. There should be a tax on the money coming to them. And if a kid is inheriting $10 billion from one of the Walton heirs and has to pay a 70% tax on it, so he only ends up with $3 billion, I'm not crying for that kid. Should you be? I mean, really. This is, the example here Megan Day gives in a piece over at Jacobin magazine. She says, well, what about Wyatt Koch, the Koch heir? He parties at Mar-a-Lago. Did he build a fortune to build his father and uncle's fortunes? No, he didn't. And beyond that, how is it possible? How is it even possible for anyone to actually earn $1 billion? I mean, seriously, think about that. If you earn $50,000 a year and you saved every single penny, after 20 years, you've saved $1 million. After 200 years, when you be dead, you've saved $10 million. It would take you 20,000 years to save $1 billion. Nobody gets $1 billion in exchange for work. It's just not possible. It's not conceivable. Instead, they get that $1 billion for owning enormous companies that employ tens of thousands of people, and the labor of those people is what makes those companies possible, and the money that they're making is the difference between what they're paying their labor and what they're able to skim off the top. Which is why a high tax rate causes wages, labor's wages to go up. And think about it. If the CEO, if the CEOs went on strike like they did in Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's book, if the CEOs every CEO in America were raptured tomorrow and just vanished for 2 weeks, how does that affect our economy? It doesn't. But if every employee at every company with a billionaire CEO was raptured for 2 weeks, it would shut down the whole damn economy. Who's more important, the CEOs or the workers? There is no reason for billionaires to exist. None. And there's absolutely no reason for their children to inherit all of their money. 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your thoughts on my thoughts and the news of the day right after this. In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, The reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering beyond the present wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Wayne in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Wayne, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I've had a thought, a suspicion about these missing children. Is there any kind of indication or evidence that you can think of that these children haven't been sold?
I would not be surprised to learn that at least some small fraction of them have been sold.
Yeah, I think that's why they can't be returned.
Well, apparently they can't be returned because when Trump and Kelly and Nielsen and Pence ordered this brutal treatment in order to be a, quote, deterrent to parents south of the border. We're going to hurt these children so bad, you don't want to bring your children up here and subject them to this. That's essentially what John Kelly said in a press conference. I mean, he said this to the world, right? When they set out to do this, they didn't have any system, any plans for how to keep track of these kids. And this again, even more gives the lie to their, oh, well, Obama did it too. No, Obama didn't do it. Nobody, no president in the history of the United States has torn children from their parents as a strategy to inflict pain on them, to cause other people to say, I don't want that kind of pain. It's never been done.
Is this a crime against humanity?
It is a crime against humanity, in my opinion, Wayne. This is worthy of The Hague. And now to come out and say, oh, well, these children have now bonded with their foster parents, so you don't want to rip them away from their foster parents and give them back to their real parents. That would be traumatic. This is such
BS. We'd have to give back the money.
Say what?
I say we'd have to give back the money.
Oh, you're talking about for any of those kids who might have been sold. We just don't know where these kids went. You know, some of them went to relatives, some of them went to foster families, some of them probably went to human traffickers. I mean, these guys are very sophisticated. There's a very high profit business selling kids. There's big bucks.
A new angle on this, Tom, is that these are Native Americans. They're Mayans.
Yeah, by and large. Yes, the vast majority of them.
I think that's a factor that hasn't been brought out. These are Native Americans that we are treating this way, just like we treated them 150 years ago.
Yep, they are. In this case, they're Native South and Central Americans, but you know they're absolutely Native Americans. And you're correct. Nobody's talking about that because by and large, in the United States, when we talk about Native Americans, we're largely talking about people who were in North America, who were actually the descendants of the second large wave of immigrants to the Americas. The first large wave appears to have landed actually in Peru, and spread across South America and going north, and then the people in North America appear to have crossed the Bering Sea land bridge and migrated south. But so they are somewhat different genetically and all that kind of stuff. But still, these are people who have been on this continent for 20, 30, 40,000 years. And in fact, the Native Americans that we are stopping at the border and interring have probably been here longer than the Native Americans who we have put into reservations and against whom we committed such a large genocide that it actually changed the climate of the world. I mean, which I'm going to get into tomorrow. This is mind-boggling stuff. Wayne, thanks for the call. Well said. Zach in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Morning, Tom. Real quick, I just want to say Alex Cortez and Marianne Williamson, to me, are the two of the most dynamic people speaking about the hard-edged truth.
I agree.
Especially Marianne Williamson, the way she articulates not only our problems but potential answers is remarkable.
Yeah, I agree. She was on this show a couple of weeks ago. I sent a note to her yesterday asking if she could come back on the program. I haven't heard back.
I'd love to see her again. But my main point is back to the nuclear conversation. I think there's a narrative forming now on purpose that if, here it is in front of us. If Mueller brings me up on charges, it's going to ruin my friendship with him. And, from Putin's side, Putin's saying, leave my puppet alone or I'm going to blow something up. And I can see this forming.
Yeah, I don't think it's that so much as,
You put the damper on Mueller. You follow me?
No.
No?
No, what I see happening is that when Gorbachev and Reagan, and then later Gorbachev and Bush Sr. negotiated this deal to end the Soviet Union, the absolute assurance that we gave to what would now become the Russian government, but was then the Soviet government, the absolute assurance that George Bush and Reagan had given to Gorbachev was that we will never invite any of these countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, well, maybe not Hungary, Poland, and obviously Ukraine. We will never invite them to join NATO, and therefore we will never militarize your border. And in exchange for that, Gorbachev said, okay, cool, we'll destroy a bunch of nukes, we're going to privatize things, we're going to, join the Confederate of Nations and blah, 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 blah. And then during the Clinton administration, we went back on that deal. And I think it was the Baltic states. I think it was Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. I could be wrong, but at least a couple of the countries that we had said we would not bring into NATO and we would not militarize, we did. And Russia has been freaking out ever since. And now, now we're threatening to do it with Ukraine, and they're really freaking out. And so I think that what they're saying is, and they've been saying, since 2007, Putin has been saying he wants out of this IMF, out of this treaty, so that he can build nuclear weapons that could be used in a European battlefield. I think that he's basically saying, you're gonna militarize my border, I'm gonna militarize my border, and I'm gonna do it with nukes to scare the hell out of you. That's what I think is going on, Zach.
Trump in Helsinki, pull out of NATO and crash Obama's economy.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I think he told Trump at Helsinki, one of the three things or two of the three things was pull out of NATO and crash Obama's economy. And Trump loved that.
Yeah, well, I don't know about the crash in the economy because it's not Trump's. But, there's little doubt in my mind that
well, if he called it Obama.
Yeah, I don't know. Zach, thanks for the call. Gary in Gravette, Arkansas. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hello.
Hey, you're on the air.
Yes. I really enjoy your show, and I just want to tell you, I've been working for 4 years now trying to find the root causes of human conflicts and try to unify progressive social philosophy. And I'm saving on that $1,000 so I can have a more detailed conversation with you.
Okay.
But I say a socio and economic monopoly being created by corporations to monopolize profits on both ends of human misery. Whether it be wars or these children separated at the border and then put in these for-profit confinement centers, or the evolution of profiteering off of war and then positioning themselves to create war for profit.
Yeah, you can take all this back, Gary, you can take all of this back to Reagan. You can take all this back to Reagan's arguing that the government is not the solution to the problem, it is the cause of the problem. He said that in his first inaugural address on, in January 20th of 1981, as he put his hand on the Bible, the Iranians freed the hostages, and then 5 minutes later, Reagan declared war on government on behalf of billionaires and corporations, and said we need the profit motive in government. And as he brought the profit motive into government, and every Republican since then has expanded the profit motive in government, what we have seen is that it's destroying government. Spot on. You're absolutely right. And you've got these giant, for-profit prison companies now lobbying for more children to be stolen from their parents because, hey, $730 a day, we can make a hell of a lot of money here. Bob in San Jose, listening on AM 910 out of San Francisco. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Tom, I'm wondering who would have standing to bring a complaint to the Hague about crimes against humanity?
I don't know how that works, Bob. I don't know if you have to be a direct victim in order to have standing, or whether you can do it on behalf of people who no longer are around, or whatever. But certainly any family member of any of these children who've been torn apart from their families, if that's the issue you're talking about.
I think it's time for one of our humanitarian NGOs to go right to The Hague.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing, Ellen Ratner's brother Michael died last year, but he started this extraordinary human rights group, And they had 3 lawsuits. The Hamdan case is the most famous that they won against Cheney and Bush and all them. And I would love to see them bring that. Sean, do you remember the name of his group? Michael Ratner's group? Yeah, we're both brain farting it, but there are some great groups out there. Center for Constitutional Rights is what it is. CFR.
I hope someone will step
CCR.
forward in hearing this program today and actually act on it.
Yeah, I agree. Center for Constitutional Rights would be one.
Is unconscionable. This is on the scale of the stuff that put people in jails in Nuremberg.
Yes, I agree, Bob. I absolutely agree. Bob, thank you for the call. Talmira in Oakland, California. Am I saying your name right?
Yes, you are. Good morning, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. What's up?
I just want to tell you thank you so much, and I appreciate you for all of your knowledge that you inform us of. I was just saying to my mom, we don't get this type of news on a regular Channel 2 or Channel 5 news station. My concern is this. I'm hearing about the separation of the children, which I believe is basically a modern-day slavery, so to speak. I'm just trying to figure out why the children can't be found, because we live in a big brother society. Like right now, if I go on Google, it'll know where I am, what I'm doing, X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And so I just want to piggyback off of the gentleman that just got off of the phone. Like, yeah, I believe we all have a responsibility to fight for justice for our children. I know, quote unquote, this is supposed to be Black History Month, but it's the history for the people, period. We know that there's great leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King, Ida B. Wells, I can go on, Cesar Chavez, that fought for the rights of people. Is there anyone that's going to stand up, and does it take a lot of money to do so? And I just want to congratulate you and find out ways of how I can continue to support you and send donations. And
well, thank you, Talmira. We don't so much solicit donations here, but if you can tell your friends about our program, that would be a fine thing. And I so agree with your comments and your sentiments. I think that what this administration is doing is just a breathtaking level of brutality, and the fact that more Americans aren't shocked by it speaks, frankly, very poorly about our media and so many of us, that we're just inured to this. And I think that if this was being done to, blonde European kids, there would be hell to pay. Talmira, thanks so much for the call. It's great to hear from you, and I appreciate your kind words. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls in just a moment. 46 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. And welcome back. Marianne in Seattle. Hey, Marianne, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi. So I'm thinking about Medicare for All, and one of the biggest reasons that it's fought so hard, is resisted so hard, is because, you can connect the dots when it comes to all that information being in one spot. If we are taking care of children and adults, no matter what their age, and the information comes up that here are all these diseases that are related to, like they do with the coal miners, the lung disease, and they ended up putting this guy who's totally about the coal industry in charge of that cabinet position. You get liability connecting the dots, just like they did with the tobacco industry that, is just barely now starting to put out what were supposed to be resolutions with education, and they are the tiniest admissions of here's the connection between, smoking and addiction and lung disease. You got oil fracking and the oil industry having non-disclosure agreements now for settlements, and the non-disclosure agreements are for you, your children, and your grandchildren. You can't sue us again. And it's like, once you start to put all this stuff together, like we have in the cities, the incidence of diabetes going up, the incidence of all these diseases going up related to pollution and everything, that liability comes home. And it's very clear, how that line points directly to these industries and these particular folks who are benefiting by doing damage to communities in that way. So I think that's huge money that they are fighting hard to just keep as their own, acting like it's a big secret or something. But yeah, once you get all these diseases, especially with the environmental changes that are going on, if you can look at it and see it happening with Mother Earth, you can look at it and see it happening with each and every individual, but you can see it generation by generation all at once when you get a whole medical care system that is treating this. So I don't think they want people to have access to that information. They didn't want people to be able to say and go to their government. They don't want a government that will support the people in that way.
I think it even goes beyond that, Marianne. If we had, you know, I've joked in the past, joked is the wrong word, but pointed out in the past that every cancer diagnosis is worth $500,000 to the healthcare industry. We have a system right now where the more people who are obese and thus have diabetes and heart disease, the more money we're making, right? The more people that we have who smoke and are getting cancer and emphysema, the more money we're making. This is nuts. This is absolutely nuts. If you look at countries that have national health care systems, look at Australia. In Australia, they passed a law that all the tobacco packages have to have a picture on the back of a person, you know, of an autopsy photo of a black lung, right? I mean, you know, it's just gruesome what the cigarettes look like in Australia. Why? Why would everybody get together and say, let's do this? Because everybody's paying the cost of the health care for those people. You get countries in Europe, you know, Denmark, they've got a program where more than 50% of the people in the capital city of Denmark now ride their bicycles to work. And 50%. Why? Because they wanted to get people healthy, because they want to lower their health care costs. There's no incentive to do that here in the United States. The health insurance companies, everybody makes more money the sicker we are. They can jack up their profit margins. They can jack up their co-pays and their deductibles. They can raise the premiums. Everybody's making money on this, and there should not be a profit incentive in healthcare. It's insane. It should be a government function. Marianne, spot on. Said so well. Thank you so much for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. And this is the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. Stick around. I'll be right back. Just did a rant about how we have actually passed a major climate change tipping point that we can't walk back from. We can't stop it. This is coming now. It is unstoppable. This first step of it, which has to do with, you know, the destruction of major cities in the United States and all around the world. You can check this out over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, or for people who support us on YouTube as well, you can see this. Get over to patreon.com/THOMHARTMANN to check this out. We're talking about how prior to a couple of years ago, and this is how, you know, tipping points, you can only see them in the rearview mirror. Prior to a couple of years ago, in the winter, the Arctic and Greenland, the Antarctic and Greenland would recover some of their ice. Now they're not even doing that. It's just pausing. The melting is just pausing. That's that tipping point. And the consequences of this are going to be terrible. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann here with you. Jeff in Minneapolis. Hey, Jeff, what's up? Thanks for listening to AM 950.
Yeah, I was listening to you talk about the 70% tax rate and stuff, and I heard something that was pretty telling. I heard a spokesman for Howard Schultz talking, and he's saying, well, you can't do that because, after all, they're going to game the system, and they're all going to pay 15%. So is he actually arguing about a 15% tax rate rather than a 70% tax rate?
Yes, in effect. And he's also saying, oh, you poor people, you really think that you can do something about us billionaires, but we're more powerful than you. We'll figure out a way around it, which actually is not true. I mean, you know, look back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s when we had a top tax rate, and the 40s and the 30s when we had a top tax rate of 91 and 74%. And yes, not a lot of people paid those high tax rates. Why? Because today's rich people, the CEOs who are taking, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases a year, The average pay of a CEO in the United States in 1980 was $3 million a year. The average, or no, it was far less than that, actually. It was 30 times what the average worker was making. The average worker at that time was probably making around $15,000. So 30 times that would be, what, $450,000 a year? That's what CEOs were taking. So, you know, it's crazy to say that, you know, oh, well, people are just going to get around it. No, they're not. The way they get around it is by not taking the income and reinvesting that money in their business. And it's just
plus,
say what?
Yeah. Plus the fact that they might get around it isn't a reason not to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's like saying, oh, we shouldn't have laws against shoplifting because there's some people who are going to do it and not get caught.
Exactly.
Really? Really? Is this your best argument? Is that the, you know, Howard Schultz and fans? It's bizarre. Jeff, thank you for the call. Victoria in Columbia, Missouri. Hey, Victoria, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I wanted to present a different way to think about the inheritance question, which is that it's an entitlement. It's nothing that's guaranteed by the state, according to Jefferson, who you may be familiar with. His letter to Madison, September 6, 1789. He said that when people die, the dead have no rights. The money goes back to the community they live in, and it's up to them to decide what happens to it. So I think there's this inherent right people have when someone dies. They're given that right through courts and through laws, and it's up to us to decide to give them entitlements or to not. And that's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, it's well made, and I think that you know, he also made that argument for why constitutions should be amendable.
Exactly.
And he also, in another letter to Madison, he talked about how we should tax the rich in geometrically proportionate rates relative to their wealth. So, in other words, he was advocating a progressive tax. But you know, I don't think we have to go back to the 1770s to find this. It's you know, Teddy Roosevelt was promoting this in 1905, and in fact passed it. You know, the inheritance tax was passed somewhere in that era. I'm not sure exactly when. But you know, in the first decade of the 1900s, it stabilized wealth in the United States, the inheritance tax, and the people who are now talking about, you know, it's the death tax. I mean, you know, the Walton family paid Frank Luntz big bucks to come up with a way to reframe the inheritance tax that would cause the average person to encourage their elected representatives to do away with the inheritance tax. And what Frank Luntz came up with was calling it the death tax. But it's not a tax on death. If you're dead, you can't be taxed. You're dead.
That's right. Absolutely.
It's a tax on income or on wealth that is being transferred to somebody else as a consequence of that death, and that somebody else getting that money should pay a damn tax on it.
Right. I mean, anybody who thinks that the framers would support, especially Jefferson and Paine, this level of concentration of wealth is out of their minds. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. They need to review some of the early writings that they had, some of them which are pretty incredible, as you've noted before.
Yeah, and not just Jefferson and Paine, who were the kind of, you know, liberal outlaws, but also like John Adams, you know, that day's conservative. You know, he was not a rich guy, and he was very freaked out about rich people. So anyhow, Victoria, thank you. Very well said. I appreciate the call. Well, quite a day today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time. And we never even discussed the Super Bowl. Well, that's a relief. We'll be back. Same bat time, same bat place tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It really isn't. You know, I was sitting around complaining about Donald Trump. It's cathartic, but it doesn't move the needle. It doesn't move things forward. It doesn't make things happen. That happens when you join a group, when you show up, when you actually participate. So get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We need your help. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.